So I'm a product of upstate New York. My grandfather was a Lutheran minister, which meant every Sunday I grew up in church. One of those Sundays, a single-digit age, I was playing with my cars and trucks in the pew, and the pastor asked the rhetorical question, what's the most important thing in life? And to the shock and chagrin of my parents, shocked that I was paying attention and chagrined by the answer, I whipped around and said, money! And that pretty much defines my passion for the rest of my life. Not just the idea of generating it and putting it in my bank account, but really fiat currencies, how it works, how little we actually understand about money and currencies. Flash forward today, I'm very fortunate to work for Simon-Kucher. I've been there for 15 years, and we're a company that helps other companies understand the value they're creating and then how to translate that into a number, usually manifest in money. We don't usually pay in shells and sand anymore. And how to put prices on things. So that's what we're broadly recognized for. There's 2,000 plus of us around the world. We've been doing it for 40 years. And as mentioned, sort of a topic that we get known as specialists on. So today, I wanted to share a little bit of those thoughts and some things we learned in writing that book, Beating Inflation, and hopefully some things you can take back to your businesses as you try to convey these ideas to other people. So the first important idea to get across, profit is a condition of survival. It's not bad, it's not evil. And this is an evergreen business, right? So you're all trying to build businesses that last for generations, 100 plus years. One of those implicit assumptions, economists can come in and say profit maximization, yada, yada, yada. The implicit assumption is if you profit, you can keep your business going. And if you don't profit, it ceases to exist. Again, kid from Rochester, New York, growing up watching Kodak, Xerox, Bosch, and Lomb, all fail when I was a teenager and take down with it the life savings of my friends, parents, my family members, et cetera. So I think to those origin stories, it's probably one reason I'm so interested in the topic. So let's think about inflation and how this affects your profits. Well, profit is very simple. First and foremost, the making it's very hard to do, but the math is pretty simple. Price times volume minus costs. There's a lot of other more complicated ways to explain it, but it's really just P times V minus C. And what's left is your profit. And I always joke with people, how much time do you spend thinking about C, and how much time do you spend thinking about the P? And it's a very underinvested topic. Well, let's talk about inflation. What did we learn? This is it on a single chart. It's fun to follow David and kind of the things he was talking about, but if you look back in 15 years of our money supply, this is what happened as COVID kicked in. And we basically 18x'd the amount of money at a period that we 2x'd our GDP. And when Herman and I started batting these ideas around, our first thinking was it was going to be supply constrained, less stuff. We're shutting down factories. People in pork plants, instead of standing next to each other, they're 6 feet apart. We have less stuff to buy. But this was the real problem. We inserted a lot more money. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it created a dislocation in balance. And when that happens, a lot of money chasing fewer things, you get that. And that was that inflationary spike. Rapid onset inflation, you all lived through it. And what I like to ask now to these audience members is, what did you learn from it? Other than, wow, that's scary. There's a couple big lessons, and we'll hit on them here. The first thing I hope you all learned, it's actually something David had mentioned in passing, and it's the number one thing that kills companies. It'll kill an evergreen company or any other company. And it happens during inflationary periods, and it's the money illusion. I've never been in an event where someone else actually said it. If that thing's doing the right thing in the dark room and it looks like it's moving, it's not. It's an optical illusion. But this is the thing that kills companies, and it's an existential threat to every business. It's always there, actually. Inflation never goes away. It's always working in the background, but it gets accentuated during times of inflation. So what is it? It's this idea. It's the nominal dollars in your bank account are going up, but your real purchasing power is going down. And you get a disconnect there. Remember those articles that started coming out 2022, 2023? I've never made more and felt poor. That was the everyday experience of the money illusion at work. And it caught a lot of businesses off guard, and those who didn't react right are not in this room today. It was an existential threat. Let's put some numbers around that, right? So if you had $1 in your pocket at the start of 2010, by the end of the decade, which was a great decade for inflation, by the way, the Fed, first time ever, kept it below 2%. It was about 1.8 over the entire decade. So if you think about how long they've been in business, they're not winning all that often. But it was a great and unusual period, and it lulled a lot of us into sleep and just thought that that would perpetuate forever. So you needed $1.17 on New Year's of 2019 to have the same purchasing power. Well, it's been fun getting to know you. Competitive people, we like to win. The contest last night, you beat them in the fishing. Great news. We crushed it this decade. We're only 3 years in. It only took the first 3 years to realize the same cumulative effect of inflation in the 2020s. You run it out to the end of the decade, and it looks like this. Now, we can argue the numbers are right or wrong, but let's make it easy. Instead of 17, say 15. Instead of 63, say 60. What's the delta? We saw the math one, make the blocks different ways. It's 4x. So the effect of inflation in this decade is going to be about 4 times the effect of the prior decade. And what does it mean for every one of your businesses? More price adjustments, higher levels, and just normalizing the ability to stay ahead of the money illusion. Because if you don't have the ability to reinvest in your R&D, in your team members, in your plants, in your facilities, and all the things that made your companies great. You slowly atrophy into oblivion, and it's a long, slow death. But that's the risk of the money illusion. So here's a shared experience you all had. And I'm going to remind you of it so you can remember later on in the talk when I tell you don't repeat it again. 2021, it felt like we were crazy yelling into a void. And you're like, I'm observing. It's transitory. I'm different. No, you're not. By 22, 23, you took action. And it wasn't just action. It was heroic action. Instead of raising prices just once a year, you did it twice. You didn't ask for 3%, you asked for 5%. No, but seriously, several of you went to quarterly price adjustments. One of our clients did 13 price increases in an 18-month window. Many of you probably had to do that 20%, that 30%, massive price adjustment because you fell behind. And then you were patting yourselves on the back, and Thanksgiving was awesome in 2023, and then you had your Q4 board meeting, and you go, oh, crap, we got to do it all over again. This doesn't go away. It perpetuates. And that's the story of the 2020s. We're halfway through it right now. You hopefully learned on that spike, and to the credit of the Fed, they brought it down faster and deeper than I think a lot of us expected. But that's what happens in the need to be agile from a pricing perspective when inflation hits or spikes. This is something you can all use. This is the slide, take a picture, we'll send it to you. It's the root of a lot of our work, and it's this idea of a value map. And so what you're looking at here is on your y-axis, that's the perception of price, and your x-axis is your perception of value. And it helps put inflation into context. What you'll see here is your high price, high value supplier up on the top right, low price, low value down left, balanced market in between. Got to watch out for a couple places. Hubris zone, really high price, low value. You'll know if you're there, you're losing all your customers. The attack zone sounds really cool, right? Super high value, low price. I'm going to go off script here because the conversations with you and everyone said you got to tell us all about that. Most of you probably live here. 70% of my work or more comes from private equity and venture capital. We can figure out if you're there 3 weeks before even buying a company now. That really started around 2010. By 2015, our work was getting underwritten into deal proposals and banking. And we can spot an undervalued company at the product level, not the whole company. Why does that matter? Well, if you have the highest value and a really low price, you create a price war. This is where price wars come from. And the number one target of a private equity firm right now, second, third generation business, haven't taken the time to think about price, spotted a mile away. Haven't done a price adjustment in 15 years. They know that they can have us validate that on the way in, buy the business, take price quickly, get the EBITDA up, and make a ton of money. And as I got to talk to Dave about this business and Tugboat and what you're all about, a little part of my soul dies every time that happens, and I do it for somebody who's in private equity. I'd much rather see you pocket those gains. So please, take the time. You don't have to hire us to do 10,000 person surveys. Sit down with your execs and say, where are we? Where do we think our competitors are? It's a really powerful tool just to understand where you are and make sure you don't hang out there forever because you got the right to go up and make more profit. So what happened in inflation, though? The other thing you can learn, now I'm back on script. Sorry for the tangent. Well, what happens is it's like gravity. You can't get away from it. So everyone gets affected. And you moved at different paces. I will always say, move fast, move first. The other guy's going to have to catch up, but you'd much rather do that. Well, this is what happened. Everyone moved up. And what happens when that happens? It takes a little while, but resets. That perception of value is really slow, the x-axis. It takes a while for people to get there, but you look around and everything else also went up, and I guess this is just the world of $15 hamburgers. I'm gonna go get a hamburger. It's not that simple. You got a lot of elasticity questions, but that's the next part. So let's put a pin in this and talk about other items that are happening right now. So what can this teach us in that inflation experience you just lived through about tariffs? Well, the first news is tariffs are just pricing. You go back 2,000 years, the word tariff is actually derived from price, and it's been around forever. Governments have always done this. We have 46 offices in 26 countries. We're pricing around tariffs. We're working in countries with hyperinflation. You know, it's just that in America, we don't see them as much, but it's always part of the game. So if that one spike of money supply was the story of inflation, this is the story of tariffs. They're basically a wedge. So let's hypothesize a German manufacturer selling into America, $7.50, no tariff, that's you on the left. At a 10% tariff, what happens? That monopolistic power comes in, says, I'm gonna disrupt this balance and participate a little bit. This is where it gets tricky. You run the profit optimization curve on the top line, and you go from 750 to 775. Just a quarter, just pass it through, people will pay. But the seller in has to bring their price down to about 704 to make room for the 10% wedge. Go back to 20%, that wedge gets bigger. Price goes up to 8, sell-in goes down to 667. That's why so many of your suppliers, if you're buying in from Asia, when all this happened, they were cutting price to you to make room for that wedge, and you were talking about going up. Both parties are affected. So if the money illusion is what killed people during inflation, the simple concept that's going to hurt a lot of businesses and be an opportunity for so many of you in the room is elasticity. A lot of people call it price elasticity. It's fancy math. It has some deltas in it. But just think about it as the movement of volume. Volume is going to be in play right now in a way that we have not seen in generations, potentially. So go back to that German selling to the United States. This is what that math looks like when you run the numbers. Pretty realistic assumptions. That tariff makes room for the wedge. Their price only goes up a quarter, but their volume goes down. Do it again, volume drops further. Those small top line changes, making room for the tariff. So you're selling at a lower price into the country, and you're selling less units. And it's that double effect that does this. Here's where the profit goes. The seller has 62,000 and it all goes to them in a no tariff world. Introduce a 10% tariff, their profit goes down by 26%. At 20% tariffs, you're halved. Now again, good news, you're probably not German manufacturers, unless I'm in the wrong stage. But it helps illustrate, what's happening to all these people who are selling across borders and why these are such powerful effects. And we're negotiating down to 55%. These are off the chart numbers, and no one really knows what's going to happen. But let's talk about how to think about it. We'll go back to this value map, right? So hypothetical situation, competitor C and A. Government throws on a tariff. This is what's happening. It's moving the perception of price, but there's no value in a tariff. That doesn't change it at all. So volume's going to flow over to this person. Now the government wants you to make a couple of choices. This is a free society. You can go any direction you want. And they're hoping you'll go this way. Say, let's do some capital investment. Let's hire some people. Let's train folks up. We're going to surge more and more volume, get a sustainable competitive advantage that way, and just take over. And some of you are going to have that option. It's a great time. We were quoted for saying, this is actually a golden age for a lot of American businesses that we haven't seen before. If it sticks out and perpetuates, some of you are going to be big winners. Some of you are in a different boat, and you're going to do this thing. Just raise your price. And what happens? Resets the dynamic. Now that's that part where it looks easy, and the politician will say, don't worry, the prices are going to go up, but everything's going to be fine. You got to do the volume math behind it, the elasticity. But this is why tariffs drive inflation. So many of you are going to say, I don't have an option. I'm going to raise. There's two of us. The other guy's importing. He now has a 50% tariff. I don't have to be a genius. I'll go up 20, 30%, make more profit. And you can, and that's okay, because you want to sustain your business. Your relative position is going to hold. People were talking about predicting the future, and we joke, look, this is what's happening now. I have no idea. None of us do. It's all up in the air. It's all over the place. And so it's very frustrating times. We're kind of in the camp of the first half of the year, we're burning off old inventory and saying, like 2021, maybe it'll pass? Maybe? Can they negotiate faster? My boat's on the water? But the second half of the year is when we think it's certainly going to start to kick in. As your replacement costs come in, you actually have to address it. So you have a couple choices, and I'll skip over the first two. You've got the choice and criteria to think about when to take share, when to pass price. But let's assume you have that question of what if I want to pass price? So there are a couple ways to do it. It's a little bit different now than it was earlier in the decade. And we'll hit on these ideas. Surcharges. You don't like them. Salespeople don't like them. They're not for everybody, but they work. Bought a coffee this morning on the walk in. City tax, 3% for the city here. They figured out surcharges. Those baseball tickets, you ever buy an airline and get all those line items? Like, it works. And when your salespeople say you can't do it, tell them this. Waffle House did it on eggs. Now, this wasn't tariffs or inflation. We killed a bunch of birds. There wasn't as many eggs. But they got 50 cents per egg. That's a $6 plate of food with $1.50 of surcharge. Surcharges work because people understand it. They can rationalize it and say, I accept that. Now, yes, you might have to take them away. If we get more chickens and more eggs, prices come down. It's going to look awkward. They're going to ask you to go away. But we talked about it last night at dinner. The game is up fast, down slow. That's how you do it. And this is mechanically how you're going to do that. This was an HVAC manufacturer. They were making less than 1% of their revenue from surcharges. And we said, look, in a service business, you should be able to get to 10 to 15%. So here's how you do it. You get the salespeople together. You write down everything you could possibly surcharge. Then you narrow the list down. And then you test it. And you go to the market. These are the actual results. Is this fair? How much is the right number? And you found for some things they were good. But things for like refrigerant disposal fee. Well, yeah, I don't want my refrigerant getting poured in the drain. I'm okay paying you, and not $8. I'll pay you $50. So you use surcharges, and that company got their revenue up to about 10% of the revenue coming from surcharges. And why is it great for all of you? They're pure profit. Those usually costs that you are looking at and going, crap, what do I do? It's a cost to serve recovery loop. If you can understand it and really point to it, you can put it on the top line and pass it through for a period of time. Not great during inflation, better in tariffs. Price increases. So again, no one's going to say, hey, let's do this. Maybe you will, but most people in the sales organization aren't get fired up about this idea. But what I'll tell you with 25 plus years of doing this, first carrying a bag in the field and then working for Simon-Kucher, when everyone says, look, there's a cliff and we're going to fall off it, no, there's not. And the prices are not the cliff. The prices are the guardrail to keep you from falling off the cliff. And in my experience, that gap between your price and your actual willingness to pay is usually much larger than people expect. You want to blow your sales team's mind, you can tell them things like, everything we sell is underpriced. It's true. The only way you would know is if you went too far and didn't make the sale. So the whole game is how big is that gap? And then when they say, no, we could never do it. Remember in 2022 when you told me that, 2023, and we did that 20% price increase and it stuck? It kind of feels like we're having that conversation again. So learn from what happened just a few years ago and realize, okay, yeah, maybe there's a bigger gap. How do I figure it out? A couple other things. Cliffs are very rarely linear. They're jagged. Those are your segments. And I would never advise you, well, just run at the cliff. No, one at a time, and you sort of feel it out, and Dave goes, and Dave falls off the cliff, and you go, ooh, that looks not pleasant. I'm not going to go follow Dave. I'm going to go try something else over here. So you can test and learn, and you can move for it, but that's the game. How are our prices? How far are they from the willingness to pay, and can I scooch closer and closer? And usually it's the executives and the owners of the business who have to drive that message. Others won't do it. A couple of economic concepts on the right and the left. I'll start on the right. This is the idea of what you would know as boiling the frog. Lots of little price increases are going to give you a better outcome than one big punch in the face. I had a pleasure of meeting Ben and Don in the pool the other day. Past client, they came over and said, yeah, we worked with you a while ago. And you know what we learned? A, we were way underpriced, so we tried to punch everyone in the face, and that hurt. And now we just raise our prices every year. and people expect it, and it's a process, and everyone sticks. So that's true. Hopefully, some of you moved fast during inflation. Some of you maybe had to do that punch in the face. Why does it work poorly? It's this thing on the left. It's called the Gutenberg response model, and it basically says in a balanced market, if you wiggle around your price points, no one's going to go anywhere. Now, that's not true for some high elasticity raw materials, consumer goods, et cetera. But for most of your industrial businesses, you're going to be fine. But if you go really far, you can elicit these big volumetric changes. Those are the fancy ways to say it. As a former sales guy, I say that's pissing people off. And they're going to have an emotional response to your price. And you don't want that. So that's what happens over there. And the important thing to know right now, the level of tariffs we're talking about are going to do that for so many products. They're going to force people into these, I got to find an alternative. I got to look elsewhere. And that's going to put all that volume back in play. Some of you are going to be on the losing side of that trade. Some of you have an opportunity to bring volume in. But that's what we're living through right now in sort of the technical ways to understand what's happening. And the last idea there was price to value. And this idea, falls on all your shoulders again. It's that idea of understanding the gap between your value and your price and how do you close it. Because even if you kept up during inflation, I would argue a lot of you probably kept that gap really large. I use this example. Robots, selling them into Mexico, $10,000 a pop. Call me up after inflation. Adam, we got to do a price increase. Plastics up, steel's up, fuel's up, thrill pain. We want to go in, we did the accountants, they all looked at it. We need to ask for about 6 to 7%. Sorry, 6 to 7%. Took a look at them and go, you know, the government of Mexico did you a great favor. 30% across the board labor increases. Some of you might have experienced that. You don't have a $10,000 robot, you have a $13,000 robot. Your products all have a value chain that they're a part of, and as inflation moves, everything in the chain is also moving. Let's not go in and ask for 6 to 7, let's open up at 30 and settle at 15. That's what we did, because we looked at the knock-on effects of what the products are doing and how inflation affects those things. A lot of companies didn't take the time to do that. It is on your shoulders to do it. So this is the idea of if your EVA calculators are outdated, if their pricing sheets are years old, you got to stay on top of that during inflation and stay ahead of it. If your product is having knock-on effects to value, if you are a security business and the cost of shutting down a plant because of a fire problem, it's much higher today because the labor in the plant's higher. Your security system's worth more. And update all those things. Last thing, again, apologize because I'm off script on this one where people talked about last night. Write the nice letters, by the way. At the first lunch, people said, I got this letter and it said surcharges on everything, and I was really upset. You all know what a good price increase letter looks like, right? Hey, we try really hard. We're bringing value every day. We invest in our community. We do these things. Regrettably, things are up 20%. We're going to try to recover half of that by working with you and ask for 10. It always amazes me how few companies take the time to get that message out, communicate it in a smooth way, and how many of these letters I have to write for people. So take the time to do that. It's on your shoulders. Again, your clients are never going to come to you and say, I wish I could pay more for your products. Or I see so much value beyond where you could even fathom. That just doesn't happen. All right, so wrapping it up as a consultant, I have to have some takeaways. And for evergreen companies, this is some of the ones. So first off, improve utilization. If you have, so many of you say, hey, I operate only in America. I'm not affected by tariffs. You are affected by tariffs. Volume is going to start coming your way. Be ready for it. Fill your plant up. Your plant manager is going to love you. Get them up to whatever utilization he thinks is right. When that happens, turn the pricing dial. Start making incremental profit. When that happens, now you can reinvest. Paul talked about R&D and innovation. Those are the things that you take the normal profits, you plow them back into to sustain your businesses. There's some stuff about foreign markets. Some of you might wind up with an advantage and be able to start looking broader. M&A relief, again, it's a little bit jammed up right now, but basically you might have an opportunity to go and buy some things. One of my bad jokes I forgot to say was, when the tarts are being passed around, grab a tart. I'm the kale and the broccoli. No one wants to talk about pricing, so. And lastly, maintain your customer relationships. I was so happy to hear so many of you talk about that even when inflation hit or supply chain constraints were happening and people from the outside were coming in and saying, I will give you money to jump the line. So many of you said, you know what, I'm in it for the long haul. I'm going to talk to my clients who've been with me for a while. I'm going to let them know I have these opportunities, but I'm going to pass so I can deliver for them. You have that option as an evergreen company. Not everyone does. So a little bit of hopefully this too shall pass. Might take 3.5 more years. But assume the rest of the decade, and you'll be fine. And the last thing to leave you with is this idea of what can history suggest about the future. It was right there at the beginning. This is what we've lived through. But if you go back, when we came off the gold standard and kind of introduced a fiat money into America, this happens in a lot of other fiat systems. It's not a single spike, it's a double bump. And I don't know what the future is going to hold. I know some of past presenters were talking about significantly higher inflation numbers. But if you just think about, you know what? We're about to pass tax cuts and give money back into the system. I'm looking at the boat volume from China. There's less stuff to buy, less stuff, more cash. I've heard this story before. You're most likely going to be living in an environment where tariffs and inflation are coexisting. So hopefully this gave you some things to think about, how to frame it up, write it through with your teams, and navigate that environment, because it's probably what the back half of the decade is going to look like.